Welcome back. So first of all, I want to thank you if you've been listening to the channel. If you have been listening to the channel, you know I've been talking a lot about ancient Mesopotamia. I mean, this is a time period and a place of the world, or part of the world rather, that I absolutely love talking about, and I honestly can talk about it forever. But today, actually, I want to shift gears and go to another part of the world that I'm equally fascinated with, and that is Central Asia. Specifically, early Central Asia. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, being the world's largest continent in terms of landmass and population, the lands or countries that make up Central Asia are as fascinating as they are diverse. Centuries ago, Europeans, starting with the ancient Greeks and Romans, referred to everything east of the Bosporus as Asia. This definition eventually expanded to India and to faraway, I guess in those days, the mythical lands of China and Japan. So in a sense, Asia has become a blanket term for all lands of the East, or that is, all lands east of Europe. Today, actually, I think people in the West, when they hear the word Asia, they think of what we call the Far East, namely Eastern China and Japan, and also, I guess, the Koreas. Not too far away from these countries is what's known as Southeast Asia, and these countries consist of Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Indonesia, and a few others that I can't think of off the top of my head. And then, of course, there is South Asia, which is made up of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Some people add Afghanistan in there, but I think Afghanistan is maybe more towards Central Asia or more oriented towards Central Asia than South Asia, but that's debatable. Anyway, the annals of history scarcely mention the words Central Asia. In fact, this is actually a fairly recent term in the Western lexicon that came into common use after the breakup of the Soviet Union. This breakup created several independent republics, namely Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. These new countries, now technically independent of Moscow, became known as Central Asia. This term, though, proved to be very fluid. After all, political boundaries created by Soviet politicians and geographers do not always reflect realities on the ground. For example, countries such as Mongolia or areas such as China's Xinjiang province and parts of south-central Siberia have less in common with the other Asias described above and are geographically and culturally more similar to Central Asia. This is potentially problematic indeed, especially given that the historical and present importance of this region cannot be understated. This is an ancient land with peoples and traditions which go back several thousand years. Now, in this short segment, I'm obviously not going to talk about the entire history, but I do hope that when I talk about the early history, this will sort of pique your interest in this region of the world, and maybe you'll be inclined to learn more about it. So first, let's talk about where and exactly what is Central Asia. So Central Asia is a vast expanse of land that occupies nearly 8 million square miles, or approximately 1/7 of Earth's landmass. Historically, this region has been a diverse place with numerous ethnic groups, tribes, languages, and religions. For much of recorded history, the peoples of this region have been primarily nomadic. The concept of belonging to a state with predefined borders is pretty much alien to these people. Most groups over here have been nomadic and for centuries, if not thousands of years, have been organized into various clans and tribes, where they generally share what's believed to be a common ancestor. It was to this group, and not any kingdom or state, that most Central Asian peoples were ultimately loyal to. The same is essentially true today. One has to remember that the current borders of a lot of these countries, I'm talking about Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, they were drawn up by the Soviets. So though Central Asia is home to many different languages, most of these fall into two main families: Indo-European and Altaic. People of Indo-European origin first came to the steppe of Central Asia around 4000 BCE, though some scholars believe it was actually earlier. Around 3000 to 2500 BCE, a branch of these people spread towards the Iranian plateau and the Indian subcontinent. Their languages developed into Persian and its various dialects, as well as Hindi, Punjabi, and the other Sanskrit-based languages of the North Indian subcontinent. The second main group of Central Asian languages belong to what is known as the Altaic family. These include Turkish and its many sister tongues, such as Kazakh, Uzbek, Azeri, and Uyghur. I think I said that right, Uyghur. It also includes Mongolian and, at least according to some scholars, Korean. Now, one factor that has defined Central Asia is the steppe, that large area of flat, treeless terrain that makes up a great chunk of the region. Given the area's rough and often not so hospitable terrain, most people in Central Asia were nomads. While there may not have been a lot of stable farmland, the steppe did have something of great value: horses. The nomads of the steppe put these horses to good use and became extremely skilled at riding and fighting on them. Over time, their skills with the horse made them some of the most fearsome and cunning warriors in the ancient world. In fact, in many steppe societies, living a sedentary life and farming were considered to be reserved for those of low status. A man's wealth in those days was determined by the number of fine horses and sheep that he possessed. Horses were more valuable than gold. Along with mobility, horses also provided meat and even milk. For those, though, who lived in the city, the steppe was a land filled with barbarians. The ancient Iranians referred to the area, especially the lands beyond the Amu Darya River, as Turan, a country that was, at least in literature, their historic rival. Ancient Chinese historians also wrote about the peoples of the steppe in condescending terms. They believed them to be primitive horse herders who lacked any form of sophisticated culture and dressed poorly in rough clothes made of animal hides. This actually makes a lot of sense because the Chinese were really fond of silk. However, this may not have actually been true. In fact, archaeologists have uncovered a great deal of evidence to the contrary. In fact, many Central Asian nomads lived luxurious lives. I'm going to read to you a quote from a book on Central Asia that I have, and it says, when describing these nomads, I quote, "They lined their fur garments necessary for the cold with silk obtained from China and other precious textiles from Iran. They made extensive use of gold and gilded objects in their finery. Barbarian clothing was anything but primitive. Nomads had a rich tradition of oral poetry, song, and music. Some scholars credit them with the invention of bowed musical instruments, such as the violin, derived perhaps from the ancestor of the kobis, still played by Central Asian peoples, such as the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz today." End of quote. Yeah, so that sounds very, very primitive. I'm being sarcastic. For example, if you're actually watching this program, take a look at this guy over here. This is the famous Golden Man of Kazakhstan, most likely an Indo-European nomad. As you can see over here in the costume he's wearing, he's pretty decked out. I mean, this guy he's a pretty dapper dude. He would be, the life of the party, given his dress, anywhere, let alone in ancient, or on the ancient Central Asian steppe. It's quite an intricate costume he's wearing there. He was probably some kind of tribal chieftain. Anyway, in general, the early nomads of Central Asia stayed away from most cities. However, over time, they began to interact more with the settled peoples and urban centers that they came in contact with. The reasons for this are actually pretty obvious. Think about it. The nomads needed or wanted things that their free-roaming lifestyle was not conducive to producing, such as textiles, different weapons and goods made of bronze and iron, agricultural foodstuffs, fruit, vegetables, gold, and wine. These are all things that came from cities. So while for the most part they looked down on city folk, they coveted the things that the people of the city could produce and provide. Now, from the large group of people known as the Indo-Europeans came various subgroups. One of these were known as the Indo-Iranians or Indo-Aryans. They descended onto the steppe from what is now southern Russia around 3000 to 2500 BCE and continued to move southward through the area into what is now Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and maybe parts of Kyrgyzstan. Their tribal name was Arya, which means lord or free person. Some translate the word to mean noble. As they moved further south, they split into various groups, with one moving towards South Asia, today what's northern India and Pakistan, and the other group around 1500 BCE to the land that bears their name today, Iran. Actually, the name Iran means land of the Aryans. These Aryans were also known to be great warriors and were known as Ratheshar, which means one who stands on a chariot. Though nomads, the Aryans of the steppe were a cultured people possessing a sophisticated society and class structure. They had a polytheistic religion in which many gods and goddesses were worshipped. They also believed in Asha, the divine law which was responsible for order in the universe. In a broad sense, Asha means truth and is described as the force that essentially governs everything from the way the cosmos functions, natural phenomenon that occur, to one's individual and proper relationship and dealings with others. Some even translate it as righteousness or righteous order. It's into this society and religious doctrine that the Iranian prophet Zarathustra, known as Zoroaster in the West, arrived. Born sometime around 1500 BCE in Central Asia, some scholars believe near the Aral Sea in present-day Uzbekistan, Zarathustra preached a religion that was based on many of the ideals of the Aryan religion of the time, with one major exception, the belief in monotheism, or one God. He taught that the world was divided into good and evil, and that God, whom he called Ahura Mazda, was the only being worthy of being worshipped. At first, many in Aryan society were vehemently opposed to Zarathustra's teaching, but eventually the religion that he taught caught on when a local king named Vistas became one of his followers. This religion, known today as Zoroastrianism, in at least one form or another became the state creed of several pre-Islamic Persian kingdoms and empires, and was the dominant religion for the Indo-Iranians in both Iran and Central Asia for several thousand years. Zarathustra taught his followers that the world was a battleground between the forces of good and evil, and that mankind should be aligned with Ahura Mazda and all that is good. If at death a man or woman's good deeds outweighed the bad, he or she would enter into heaven or paradise. If the opposite were the case, he would descend into the depths of hell. At the end of time, there would be a resurrection where all souls would arise and face a final judgment, with evil eventually being defeated. Those who are wicked would then be purified and allowed to enter the eternal abode of happiness, also known as heaven. Scholars of religion believe that Zarathustra's teachings and doctrines, such as the concepts of heaven and hell, angels, and a day of judgment, as well as the appearance of a savior at the end of time, are the source of many similar beliefs in the Judeo-Christian tradition as well as in Islam. In Central Asia, Zoroastrianism is often called Mazdaism or Mazdayesniism, both terms translated loosely as Mazda worship. Now, not all Iranian-speaking people shared Zarathustra's ethical philosophy. Some actually seem to practice the antithesis of it. For example, the nomadic Scythians, also members or speakers of Iranian or Indo-European languages, were known to be vicious warriors. Herodotus, the Greek historian and the so-called father of history, claims that Scythian warriors could not be defeated and made trophies and drinking cups out of the heads of their vanquished enemies. Despite legends of their brutality, the Scythians and other peoples of the steppe did have codes of honor and conduct. They were generally known to be very straightforward in their dealings and to honor contracts with others, including other tribes. Their women were also said to have been of equal status to the men, something not common in patriarchal societies of the ancient world. In terms of religion, Scythians were polytheists like other early Aryan tribes, though they had special fondness for animals and believed many of them had special powers. Other Indo-European tribes settled in the fertile valleys and oases of the Central Asian steppe. These people became the Sogdians, Bactrians, I always say this wrong, Khwarezmians, and the Khotanese Saka. The latter actually extended their domain to the borders of eastern China, what is today the Xinjiang province of China. Now, despite their geographic dispersion, these peoples maintained many similarities with each other in terms of their language, culture, and customs. Though fiercely independent, the tribes of Central Asia were, at least in theory, brought under the same political apparatus when the Persian Achaemenid emperor Cyrus the Great conquered the region around the 540s BCE. The empire further expanded into Central Asia under one of his successors, Darius the Great. The arrival of the Achaemenid Persians and the spread of their empire in the mid-500s BCE brought many changes to the Central Asian steppe. As the Persians expanded their realm to include parts of Central Asia, they brought with them access to the lucrative trade routes of Mesopotamia and the world beyond the Mediterranean. The steppe, in turn, and what became known as the Silk Road became the main conduit to linking the West with the wealthy Chinese kingdoms of the East. The nomads of the steppe were instrumental in protecting these important trade routes, especially the dangerous routes that led through the deserts of Mongolia, I guess for example the Gobi, and the Taklamakan in what is today, again, China's Xinjiang province. Guides who knew the ins and outs of the steppe and deserts were crucial for merchant caravans that wished to cross from one end to the other. Actually, the word Taklamakan means, quote, once you enter, you cannot leave, end of quote. I'm not exactly sure which dialect that's in, whether it's in Chinese, or whether it's one of the Turkic dialects. Anyway, though there were many similarities between the Persians and the Iranian peoples of Central Asia, centralized rule of this area proved to be extremely difficult. There were frequent rebellions, and Cyrus the Great even met his death at the hands of a Scythian woman named Queen Tomiris of the Masagate tribe. At least this is what Herodotus records. There's some skepticism as if this event actually happened, but the popular history is that, yes, he was killed by a tribe of Scythians in probably, I think, what is now Turkmenistan, somewhere up there. Eventually, though, the areas of Sogdiana, Khoarezm, Bactria, and Margiana were subdued and became important satrapies or provinces of the Persian Empire. Alexander of Macedonia, who conquered the Achaemenid Empire, also incorporated these regions into his empire. He even took his wife, Roxana, from among these people. In fact, Roxana was believed to have been a princess of Bactria. So, as Alexander went across this region, he founded several cities named after himself, known as Alexandrias. Now, as powerful as Alexander was, his Greco-Macedonian empire proved to be short-lived. Shortly after his death, his empire was divided amongst his generals, with Seleucus taking over basically what was the Iranian provinces and Central Asia. Basically, his descendants and their followers didn't really last too long, at least politically, because eventually the Greek colonists that were brought over to these areas, especially Bactria and Sogdiana, broke away and formed their own independent kingdoms, essentially blending Iranian or Indo-European culture and religion with that of their Hellenistic forebears. So this is just a quick synopsis of ancient Central Asia. In future, I'm going to go through, a lot of these topics in much more detail, but I just wanted to touch up on this for the sake of diversity and because I honestly like talking about all different types of history on this channel, which in the future I will do as soon as I get more time to do it. Anyway, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. If you thought this video was helpful, please hit that like button because it helps the channel out a lot. And I hope to see you soon. Take care, and until next time.